So I once had a spiritual experience in an insurance office. Several years ago, I went to get car insurance, and I met with a different agent than I had planned on. And he began to fill out the form and ask all of the typical questions. And he asked where I worked. Well, at the time, I worked at Unity World headquarters. And he said, "What's that?" And it was one of those many times that I was forced to explain. And so I talked about Unity's history and philosophy, and I mentioned about Silent Unity, our prayer ministry, and my beliefs about prayer. And right away, our conversation had turned to the spiritual. He shared two experiences in his life with prayer. One with a friend who had been injured in a scuba accident and had pain in his ear. And after a simple prayer, that pain disappeared. He told a story about one time when his young son had a very high fever, and his wife had gone to the store to get medicine. And he did a simple prayer, and the boy's fever disappeared. That very brief conversation and sharing those stories felt mystical to me. It was as if he and I were the only people in the office. It was as if the walls suddenly disappeared. There was a presence there in that moment. And it was something that helped me remember again how important this presence was to me, how important understanding prayer and spirituality was to my life. So today we're going to talk about the concept of a greater reality. You know, that experience seemed arranged by Spirit. For me, it was a sign. So what life experiences have left you filled with the joy of life? When have you been intoxicated by spiritual bliss? While we go about our daily lives, we may also utilize the experience of the universal Christ or our spiritual nature. And today we'll explore these questions. What is a greater reality? And I'll use the word mysticism today, and mystic. What is a mystical experience? Am I a mystic? And how do I live from a greater reality? In a sense, we're doing this all the time without consciously thinking about it. I invite you to affirm with me. I see God, God sees me. I choose a greater awareness of my divine nature. Catherine of Siena experienced frequent ecstatic visions. She lived in the 14th century in Siena, Italy. The town in Tuscany is known for its wine and medieval brick buildings. Catherine's father was a wool dyer with a very large family to support. At 7, Catherine pledged her life to God. At 15, she cut off her hair to protest an arranged marriage. At 16, she survived smallpox and joined a Dominican order. At 20, she and Jesus exchanged hearts. Let me explain. She explained that Jesus appeared to her with a heart in his hands and said, "Dear daughter, I took your heart away from you the other day. Now you see, I'm giving you mine so that you can go on living forever." At 21, she acted as a peacemaker during a war and convinced the Pope to return to Rome. At 27, her superiors interrogated her about her visions. At 31, Catherine was serving as an advisor to the Pope and published her Dialogue of Divine Providence, her conversations with God. And in that book, among other visions, she described a bridge between earth and heaven. Crossing the bridge meant moving attention from earthly excesses to focus on God. So what have you done with your life? After learning about Catherine, I kind of feel like an underachiever. She completely devoted herself to Christ. Now, I struggled a little bit with understanding the story in 14th century language. I've translated some of it for you. But mystics like Catherine connected with something otherworldly, what I would call a greater reality. So, what about this reality? What about everyday life? One understanding of the divine is linked to these two ideas. It's the notion that we find in Greek philosophy and that was adopted by many Christians. And it's this notion that God mind is unchanging and constant. It suggests that there are two realities, the relative and the absolute. The relative is our world of changes and choices, the world of COVID. The absolute is the realm of divine ideas, sometimes symbolized by fish in the Bible. Prayer and meditation helps dissolve the seeming barrier between the relative and the absolute, or the greater reality. And so those divine ideas can be part of our world and part of our experience. So what is a mystical experience? Mysticism is the experience of a direct communion with the ultimate reality. And mystics report knowledge of God, direct knowledge of God, and spiritual truths. Every world religion has mystics. So are you a mystic? You may never have thought of yourself as one. The path of a mystic is the journey of the heart. Think about contemporary mystics, Esther Hicks, Deepak Chopra, the Dalai Lama, or Thich Nhat Hanh. Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, the founders of Unity, were mystics. Myrtle once wrote to a correspondent. I'll give you the quote. "We are rejoicing in the heights your consciousness and the consciousness of your dear ones becomes merged in the Jesus Christ consciousness, and you are freed from every limitation." For some Christians, the term Christ is associated only with Jesus. In Unity, we understand Jesus of Nazareth to be a historical man, and we recognize the Christ as a title, meaning anointed one. Jesus became the Christ. He became a great example. Richard Rohr writes in his latest book, The Universal Christ, that the Christ Spirit is indeed everywhere, and another name for everything, another name for the greater reality. Mystics alter their consciousness, freeing themselves from limitation. And while some mystics separated from the world, being a mystic can also mean living a seemingly ordinary life. The Bible includes mystical stories, from Daniel interpreting the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar, Elijah seeing a chariot of fire, to Paul hearing Jesus calling him to a new life. So beyond mystical occurrences, rather I should say, because mystical experiences are beyond the senses, language is limited in describing them, right? We're describing something in the spiritual. So what happens is mystics often describe their experiences, those mystical events in their life, through the five senses and through the sixth sense of intuition. So seeing God is a common way of describing a mystical vision. Most of the mystical experiences in the Bible are described in terms of sight. Think about the story of Jesus' transfiguration. Jesus' radiance represents Jesus fully realizing his own Christ consciousness. Hearing God is a second way of describing a supernatural event. Symbolically, hearing represents the ability to grasp the inner meaning of life, and our ears symbolize that listening mind. Tasting and smelling the things of God are unusual ways of describing mystical events. Evelyn Underhill, in her classic book, Mysticism, cited mystics as describing sweet perfumes and taste during their encounters. Even touching God is a way of describing these experiences. And of course, a sixth sense may be labeled intuition, a sense of rightness or feeling about something. And in the Bible, people have often received divine guidance from their intuition and dreams. A mystical experience may refer to a spiritual reality seemingly beyond everyday experiences. It might also be right in the midst of an ordinary life. Rabbi Mendel Furtwängler was incarcerated for 14 years in a Siberian gulag. And one of the rabbi's fellow prisoners was a tightrope walker. The rabbi asked the tightrope walker, "What is the secret to your art? What does one need to master? Is it balance or stamina or concentration?" The tightrope walker's answer surprised him. "The secret is always keeping your destination in focus. You have to keep your eyes on the other end of the rope. And how you get there is a straight line, never wavering. But do you know what the hardest part is?" And the rabbi guessed, "When you get to the middle?" No, the tightrope walker explained. "It's when you make the turn to go back the other way. When you make the turn, because for a fraction of a second you lose sight of your destination. When you don't have sight of your destination, that's when you're most likely to fall." So this morning we can ask ourselves, what is my destination? Have we lost sight of our purpose? Maybe during the week you're not sure what day it is, right? And yet we all have a purpose. I truly believe that. And it may be difficult to discern right now, but we have choices. Maybe some of you have been to this store in Honolulu. I was so impressed by the t-shirts. So like choosing a t-shirt, we still live in a very plentiful world of possibilities. We're all dealing with new realities and new choices. We're all living during this world pandemic and economic downturn and discussions and decisions about race and diversity. And maybe your emotions are all over the map. Sadness, dismay, frustration. Maybe you long for relationship, for being with each other, right? And I know this time is also charged with possibility. As has already been discussed, many of you know that I'll be taking some time off, and I just want to share briefly about that. Some of the board members have heard this before, but I realize that with my work and doing 2 jobs and 2 commutes, that's challenging long term. I'm mindful of my marriage, my health, and my personal goals. And like many of you, our summer plans and family visits have been postponed. But Keith and I are working on house projects. I'm listening for spiritual guidance, and I'm working on some other projects as well. But do know that I love and appreciate all of you. I will be available for pastoral care as needed. And we'll keep in touch. I'm just on the other side of the island. And we'll revisit what church looks like at the end of the summer. And let us all be open to divine potential. So, how do you and I live in a greater reality? What if you and I approached life from the view of a mystic? A mystic lives from the heart. And so we'll look again at those ways of describing mystical encounters and apply them to our lives, how we connect with the divine. So see God. Our physical sense of sight helps us recognize and learn about color, motion, and distance. We can observe nature. We can observe ourselves and others without judgment. We can observe how to respond to evaluation and criticism. And we can look for beauty when we're gardening, when we go for a hike, and see the world around you in new ways. Hear God. Connect to a higher power through meditation. Seek a peaceful energy. Pause from the busyness of life. Listen to others' feelings and needs. Make a regular time for prayer. Journal. And in these activities, open to listen for divine messages. The third one is, we're stuck. Okay, I think I moved things. We'll come back to that. So the third one is taste and smell the things of God. This one is kind of funny to me because I'm not sure what God smells like. But I remember joining a close friend for a meal, and that experience was a powerful lesson about being in the present moment. It was one of those many times that we shared and talked for hours without thinking about the time and even pausing to share in silent prayer. I was aware that as I traveled home that I was changed. So as we think about tasting and smelling, we can look at those, we can experience those things in life, like choosing healthy food, enjoying and focusing on each bite, because the divine is there too. Touch God. The sense of touch helps us learn about our world by feeling the size and texture and shape of things, and we can open to new ideas and explore possibilities before making plans. We can do things like try out new technology, explore ways to bring positive benefits into our lives. We can paint and create and touch the divine in our spaces. And finally, feel God. Contemplate your own body. Notice what's going on within. Some of you practice yoga or exercise to relieve stress, and that also increases awareness. We can notice our own feelings, whether it's anger or excitement, and we can be aware of our dreams and use our intuition. You know, I know that we all long for the normal, maybe anything normal. And so I just invite you to open yourself to potential. I want to go back to that quote from Richard Rohr. Presence must be offered and given, evoked and received. It can happen in a physical gesture, a quiet word or smile, a meal shared with someone we care about, where we are suddenly enlivened by a force larger than the two of us. It is so important to taste, to touch, and trust such moments. And so I choose to open to those moments. My own practice includes regular time for prayer and meditation, and I think God visits me. I look for God's design in my daily activities and in my home garden. I hear God's voice through other statements, and I'm led by my intuition and dreams, whether I'm making a major life decision or routine choices. We must continue to do our ongoing spiritual work so that we are ready for moments like this, key moments in evolution. So how do you experience spirit? I invite you to affirm with me again. I see God. God sees me. I choose a greater awareness of my divine nature. A deeper understanding of the presence or your Christ nature can change your outlook and perspectives. Fulfill your destiny by uniting with divinity, your spiritual nature. Immerse yourself in a greater reality and live life with joy. Namaste.